Olivia Mitchell, the star cheerleader, and Coach Aaron Davis, the respected leader of the football team, seemed like the perfect pair in the small town of Lakeside until their forbidden affair turned deadly. What began as secret meetings and stolen moments soon spiraled into a twisted web of manipulation, obsession, and violence. When Coach Davis was found brutally murdered in his office, all eyes turned to Olivia. But the shocking truth behind his death would expose a dangerous relationship that no one ever saw coming. In the small, tight-knit town of Lakeside, high school football wasn't just a sport, it was a way of life. Every Friday night, the stands at the football field were packed with proud parents, students, and alumni, all eager to watch the Lakeside Lions dominate on the field. At the heart of this school pride was the cheerleading squad, led by a strikingly talented young woman named Olivia. She was beautiful, energetic, and a star in every sense of the word. With her long blonde hair and dazzling smile, Olivia captured the attention of everyone around her. She was the perfect embodiment of a high school queen, admired by classmates and adored by teachers. Her commitment to cheerleading was unmatched, and her flawless performances had earned her a reputation as one of the top cheerleaders in the region. Coach Davis, the head coach of the football team, was a towering figure in the school. In his mid-40s, with a strong build and a commanding presence, he had quickly become the pillar of the school's athletic program. His coaching skills were unparalleled, and his teams consistently brought home victories. He was known for his tough exterior, but few knew the man behind the whistle. Coach Davis had a way of connecting with his players, motivating them to push themselves beyond their limits. But there was always something mysterious about him. His private life was kept under lock and key, and despite his success on the field, there were rumors that he had a few skeletons in his closet. At first, Olivia and Coach Davis's relationship was purely professional. Olivia admired Coach Davis from afar, respecting his leadership and his ability to get the best out of his players. She knew that his guidance had helped the football team reach new heights, and as a cheerleader, she wanted to be part of that success. She respected him as a coach, and he, in turn, appreciated her dedication and hard work. But there was an underlying tension between them, one that neither of them fully understood at the time. Their first meaningful interaction outside of practice came during the fall season, just before the homecoming game. Olivia had stayed after practice to help organize the pep rally, and Coach Davis had been working late as well, preparing his team for the big game. As the evening stretched on, the two found themselves alone in the gymnasium. It was there, in the quiet of the empty bleachers, that the conversation between them shifted. Coach Davis complimented Olivia on her dedication, telling her that her passion for the team had not gone unnoticed. Olivia, flattered and excited, responded with praise of her own, admiring how he could inspire his players with just a few words. What started as a friendly exchange turned into a deeper conversation, one where they began to share more than just small talk. They spoke about their lives outside of school, their personal struggles, and their ambitions. The connection felt natural, and in that moment, both of them felt a spark that neither had expected. Though neither would admit it at the time, that evening marked the beginning of something that would change both of their lives forever. The attraction between them was undeniable, but both of them tried to push it aside, rationalizing that it was just a fleeting moment. Olivia had always been the good girl, the one who followed the rules. She knew it was inappropriate to entertain such feelings for her coach, but the more they interacted, the harder it became to ignore. Coach Davis, on the other hand, had his own struggles with the growing attraction. He'd always kept his personal life separate from his work. But Olivia was different. She was bright, beautiful, and so full of life qualities he had always found irresistible. Yet he knew he had to be careful. Any hint of an inappropriate relationship could ruin his career. But neither could stay away. The flirtations continued, subtle at first, growing more intense as time passed. The boundaries of their professional relationship slowly began to blur, and what started as innocent admiration turned into something far more complicated and dangerous. Neither could have predicted that their secret affair, which began with stolen glances and quiet words, would eventually lead to a devastating tragedy that would forever alter their lives and the community of Lakeside. As the weeks went by, the relationship between Olivia and Coach Davis evolved into something neither of them could control. What had started as a secret flirtation, brief conversations lingering longer than they should, quickly grew into an all-consuming obsession. Olivia, once a model student and leader on the cheerleading squad, began showing signs of strain. Her once vibrant personality dimmed, replaced by a cold detachment that even her closest friends noticed. She had always been bubbly and full of energy, but now she was quieter, more withdrawn, and her focus was no longer entirely on cheerleading or academics. Instead, her thoughts seemed constantly consumed by Coach Davis, and her every action was shaped by the desire to please him. Coach Davis, for his part, seemed increasingly agitated. Despite his carefully constructed persona as a confident and charismatic coach, his behavior began to slip. He grew irritable, snapping at players or assistant coaches for the slightest mistakes. On the outside, he continued to present himself as the composed leader of the team, but in private he wrestled with his emotions. He couldn't let go of the affair, even though he knew it was a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. His control over Olivia had deepened, and she became almost entirely dependent on his approval, feeding his own ego and sense of power. Yet, at the same time, the weight of the secret began to press down on him. He was trapped, and the fear of exposure lingered like a shadow over every conversation and meeting. Their affair was a slow burn, always carefully hidden, yet in plain sight to anyone who cared to look closely. They exchanged fleeting touches in hallways, brief glances that lasted too long, and private messages that no one else could see. The other cheerleaders started to whisper. They noticed how often Olivia would linger near the coach after practice, how she seemed to crave his attention. But none of them dared to speak up. Olivia was the star of the squad, and Coach Davis was a pillar of the community. Their bond seemed invincible, so they dismissed the rumors as idle gossip. But deep down, there was a growing sense that something was off. One afternoon, Jenna, one of Olivia's closest friends and a fellow cheerleader, decided to stay late at practice to help organize for an upcoming event. She had begun to sense that Olivia wasn't herself, that something was happening behind the scenes that didn't add up. Jenna had always admired her friend's confidence, but lately Olivia seemed distant, lost in thought, and occasionally even fearful. Jenna didn't know the details, but she knew something was wrong. As Jenna helped pack away equipment that evening, she saw them. Olivia, walking briskly toward Coach Davis's office, where he was waiting for her. It wasn't unusual for the coach to stay late with players or team members, but there was something in the way they interacted that felt different to Jenna. Coach Davis's eyes, usually so stern and professional, softened when he saw Olivia. She smiled, but there was something forced about it, like she was trying to hide the tension in her face. As they spoke, their voices barely audible, Jenna's curiosity got the best of her. She moved quietly to a corner of the hallway, hiding behind a stack of bleachers, her heart pounding in her chest. What she saw next was chilling. Olivia's body language was tense, her hands clenched at her sides as Coach Davis leaned in, speaking in a low, almost threatening tone. The conversation seemed intense, too intense for just a coach and a student. As Jenna strained to hear, she saw Olivia's face flush with anger, her lips trembling with frustration. She stormed away, slamming the door behind her as she left. Coach Davis stood still for a moment, his arms crossed, staring after her with a mix of disappointment and something darker, something that made Jenna's stomach twist in unease. Jenna's mind raced. She knew that something was wrong. There was no mistaking the emotions that had passed between them, the anger, the tension. Jenna didn't know the details, but she couldn't ignore what she had just witnessed. For the first time, a feeling of dread settled in her chest. She had seen the signs of a toxic relationship before: controlling behavior, subtle manipulation, but this was something different. It felt dangerous. She hesitated, unsure of what to do with the information she had uncovered. Olivia was her friend, someone she had looked up to, and the idea of betraying her trust made her stomach churn. But the situation felt too risky to ignore. If things were really as bad as they seemed, Olivia needed help, and if Jenna didn't act soon, things could spiral even further out of control. The seeds of fear had been planted, and Jenna's world would never be the same. The following days were filled with a sense of growing unease. Jenna couldn't shake the image of Olivia storming away from Coach Davis's office, her face contorted with anger. The look in her eyes had been one of fear mixed with defiance, and Jenna knew that something deep and unsettling was happening between them. She spent the next few days wrestling with herself, unsure whether to confront Olivia directly or report what she had seen to someone in authority. But Jenna was torn. Olivia was her friend, and she couldn't bear the thought of betraying her, especially when she had no idea of the full extent of the relationship. In the meantime, Olivia's behavior became even more erratic. She started to withdraw further from the cheerleading squad, missing practices and appearing distant when she did show up. Her once perfect cheer routines were slipping, and she lacked the energy and enthusiasm she had once poured into everything she did. Her teammates noticed the change but didn't know how to approach her. She was the golden girl of the school, admired and revered, and no one wanted to risk damaging that image by suggesting something was wrong. But as Olivia's strange mood swings became more frequent, the concern among her friends and teammates deepened. Coach Davis, too, seemed to be changing. The aloof, confident coach who once commanded respect was now showing cracks in his facade. His temper, which had always been a source of discipline for the team, became unpredictable. The once composed leader began snapping at players, yelling over minor mistakes, and growing more distant from his staff. Even his usual calm demeanor around Olivia began to crack. Jenna, who had always respected him, now found herself questioning the man who had once been a figure of authority and inspiration. The stress between Olivia and Coach Davis was palpable to anyone who was paying attention. Jenna's worries mounted as she noticed the two of them whispering more frequently in private corners, exchanging tense glances when they thought no one was looking. It was as if there was an invisible wall of tension surrounding them, one that no one dared to cross. Jenna, once the best friend and confidante of Olivia, felt like a stranger in her own circle. She tried to reach out, asking if everything was okay, but Olivia brushed her off, offering weak smiles that didn't quite reach her eyes. Finally, unable to ignore the sinking feeling in her gut, Jenna decided to confront Olivia. She caught her alone one evening after practice, just as Olivia was about to leave the gymnasium. "Olivia, what's going on?" she asked, her voice trembling with concern. "You've been acting so different. You're not yourself. Is everything okay?" Olivia froze, her eyes darting around the empty room as if searching for an escape. For a long moment she said nothing, and Jenna thought she might not answer at all. But then, with a deep sigh, Olivia looked down at the ground, her voice barely a whisper. "I can't talk about it. You wouldn't understand." Jenna's heart raced, and she tried to press further, but Olivia cut her off. "Please, Jenna, just drop it." "I'll be fine," Olivia said, her tone firm yet laced with desperation. But it was clear to Jenna that Olivia wasn't fine, not even close. The walls Olivia had built around herself seemed impenetrable now, and Jenna felt the chilling realization that her friend was drowning in something much darker than she could have imagined. The next day, Jenna couldn't shake the feeling that she was losing Olivia. She watched her from a distance, noting how she seemed more tense, her face pale and drawn. The coach was nearby, his presence looming like a shadow over her every move. Jenna's suspicions about the nature of their relationship had grown stronger, but she still couldn't bring herself to speak up. The fear of what might happen to Olivia if she told someone the truth was overwhelming. Jenna's internal struggle intensified, and the dread she felt deepened when she learned that Coach Davis and Olivia had stayed late at school again. This time it was after a long practice session, and Jenna had stayed behind to help clean up. She saw them from the corner of her eye, Olivia and Coach Davis, standing just inside the gymnasium doors, speaking in low, hushed tones. Their body language was all wrong. Olivia was clearly upset, and Coach Davis's stance was tense, almost threatening. Jenna's stomach turned as she watched the scene unfold. She could hear their muffled voices, though she couldn't make out the words. Then, without warning, Olivia turned sharply and stormed off, her eyes wild with anger and fear. Coach Davis stood still for a moment, then disappeared down the hallway in the opposite direction. Jenna's fear reached its peak. She had witnessed the tipping point, the moment when something irreversible was about to happen. She knew that whatever was going on between them had reached a dangerous precipice, and it was only a matter of time before it all came crashing down. She couldn't stay silent anymore. But what could she do? Who would believe her? It was a risk to expose the truth, and yet the weight of the secret was too much to bear. The truth was out there, hidden beneath layers of tension and secrecy, but Jenna wasn't sure how to reveal it without shattering everything. In her heart, she knew that something terrible was on the horizon, and the town of Lakeside would never be the same again. The tension between Olivia and Coach Davis reached a breaking point one cold November evening. The football season was nearing its climax, and the team was preparing for the biggest game of the year. The pressure on Coach Davis to deliver a victory was immense. The community's pride was on the line, and everyone expected nothing less than a win. But behind the scenes, things were unraveling. Olivia's once bright enthusiasm had been replaced by a sense of dread. She had become more withdrawn, consumed by the increasingly toxic relationship with Coach Davis. The pressure to maintain appearances, both for the sake of their secret affair and for the reputation of the team, was overwhelming. The weight of it all had begun to chip away at her, and Olivia no longer seemed like the confident, happy cheerleader she once was. That night, after the team's final practice before the game, Olivia was called into Coach Davis's office. The tension in the air was thick, a palpable anxiety that seemed to hang over both of them. Olivia entered the room, her heart racing, already anticipating what was to come. Coach Davis stood by his desk, his jaw clenched and his expression grim. He was pacing, a sign that he was struggling to maintain control. "You've been acting different, Olivia," he said, his voice low and strained. "You're distracted. The team needs you, and I need you focused. I've given you everything. Don't make me regret it." Olivia stood frozen in place, her hands trembling at her sides. She wanted to speak, to explain how she was feeling, but the words wouldn't come. There was so much she wanted to say, but fear gripped her. Fear of what would happen if she spoke too openly, fear of what Coach Davis might do. She had become so entangled in this web that she wasn't sure how to escape. I'm sorry, Coach," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I'm trying. It's just hard." Coach Davis stopped pacing and turned to face her, his eyes cold and piercing. "Hard? What's hard?" he demanded. "You think this is hard? You think you're the only one under pressure? The whole town is counting on me. The whole team is counting on you. So don't pull away now. Don't make this more difficult than it has to be." His words hit her like a slap in the face. She felt small, insignificant, as though everything she had worked for, everything she had sacrificed, was being dismissed in an instant. But there was something more to his tone now, something dark, something almost threatening. Olivia's stomach churned, and she instinctively took a step back. She could feel the walls closing in around her. She knew that whatever had been simmering between them had reached its boiling point. Without warning, Coach Davis reached out, grabbing her arm tightly. "You don't get to walk away from me, Olivia," he growled, his grip tightening. The raw anger in his voice sent a chill down her spine. It was the first time he had ever shown this side of himself, and it terrified her. She tried to pull away, but his grip was too strong. "I'm sorry Olivia began, her voice breaking as tears welled up in her eyes. "Sorry," he spat, his face inches from hers. "Sorry isn't good enough anymore. You've crossed a line, and now we both have to pay for it." In that moment, everything Olivia had been hiding, all the confusion and guilt she had tried to bury, exploded to the surface. Her heart pounded in her chest as she realized that she was no longer in control of this situation. She had been pulled into something far darker than she had ever imagined, and there was no way out. Coach Davis's power over her had always been there, but now it felt suffocating. She was trapped, cornered by her own choices and the growing horror of the man she had once trusted. As the argument escalated, Olivia's fear turned to rage. She pushed him away with all the strength she could muster, but Coach Davis was relentless. The intensity of the confrontation spiraled out of control, and Olivia, overwhelmed by the emotions flooding through her, snapped. In a desperate, frantic attempt to escape, she grabbed the nearest object, a heavy football trophy sitting on the edge of the coach's desk. Without thinking, she swung it at him, the impact striking him hard across the head. The blow was brutal, and Coach Davis crumpled to the floor, unconscious. Olivia froze, her breath coming in sharp gasps as she stared down at him. The realization of what she had just done hit her like a wave. She hadn't meant to kill him, not like this, but the reality of the situation was undeniable. She had gone too far, and now there was no going back. She stood over him for what felt like an eternity, her body trembling as the weight of her actions sank in. When she finally snapped out of her trance, the world around her seemed distant and unfocused. Panic gripped her heart as she realized she had no idea what to do next. Coach Davis lay motionless on the floor, blood pooling around him. Olivia's mind raced, but the thoughts were a blur. She needed to leave. She needed to run, to disappear before anyone found out what had happened. With a trembling hand, she grabbed her bag and fled the office, leaving the school in darkness behind her. The aftermath was a blur of confusion and chaos. By the time anyone discovered Coach Davis's body, Olivia had already vanished. The town was thrown into a state of shock as the police launched an investigation. But the truth, the full scope of the events that led to that horrific night, remained hidden in the shadows, waiting to be uncovered. What had started as a secret affair between a coach and his cheerleader had spiraled into something far more devastating, something that would haunt the town of Lakeside for years to come. The days following Coach Davis's death were a blur of frantic investigation, confusion, and disbelief. The entire town of Lakeside was in shock, unable to comprehend the brutal murder that had shaken their seemingly peaceful community. The police had quickly found Coach Davis's body in his office, blood staining the floor where he had fallen. The initial signs pointed to foul play, but there were no immediate leads. Olivia had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only questions and a town on edge. Detectives combed through every piece of evidence they could find. They interviewed Coach Davis's colleagues, players, and anyone who might have seen him on that fateful evening. But every answer only seemed to deepen the mystery. The police knew that Coach Davis had been under increasing pressure, but they couldn't yet connect the dots between his death and Olivia. No one seemed to have a clear answer about what had happened, and Olivia's sudden disappearance made everything more complicated. The community was left in suspense, waiting for the truth to surface. At first, the police theorized that it could have been a robbery gone wrong. Perhaps someone had entered his office looking for something of value and had killed him in the process. But as the investigation progressed, they quickly ruled that out. Nothing appeared to have been taken from the coach's office, and there were no signs of forced entry. The only clues were the marks on the floor where Coach Davis had been struck, and the bloodstains that suggested a violent confrontation. Jenna, still grappling with the shocking events she had witnessed in the days leading up to the murder, was desperate for answers. She had been struggling with her own guilt, knowing that she had seen the tension between Olivia and Coach Davis, yet had never spoken up. She felt responsible for not warning anyone, for not doing more to intervene before things escalated. But as time passed, Jenna began to realize that the signs had been there all along, hidden beneath layers of secrecy and fear. Olivia had been a different person for weeks, and it was clear now that something far more sinister had been brewing between her and Coach Davis. The realization that her friend might have been trapped in a toxic and dangerous situation was almost too much for her to bear. Meanwhile, the town's residents were starting to piece together their own version of the story. Whispers spread through the streets, fueled by rumors and speculation. Some believed that Olivia had been the victim of a power-hungry coach who had manipulated her for months. Others argued that Olivia was a cold-blooded killer, someone who had snapped and taken matters into her own hands. But no one could say for certain, because no one truly knew what had happened between the two of them behind closed doors. The police eventually began to focus their attention on Olivia's background. They discovered that she had a troubled history, nothing major, but enough to raise questions. Olivia had grown up in a broken home with parents who were often absent or distracted. She had been seeking attention and validation for years, and her relationship with Coach Davis seemed to give her that. What started as admiration had evolved into something darker and more dangerous. The police realized that she had become isolated, emotionally dependent on a man who was supposed to guide her but instead had taken advantage of her vulnerability. They uncovered the late-night meetings, the whispered conversations, and the increasingly tense moments they had shared. But they still couldn't make sense of the violent encounter that had led to Davis's death. Then a breakthrough came. A witness came forward, someone who had seen Olivia leaving the school late that night. The person, a janitor who had been working near the gym, reported seeing her flee the building in a hurry. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with panic. The witness described her as looking lost and distraught, as though she didn't know what to do next. The police immediately focused on this lead, realizing that Olivia might have been more involved in the murder than anyone had initially suspected. But even with this new information, the search for Olivia was slow and difficult. She had vanished without a trace. Her social media accounts were deleted, her phone went silent, and there was no sign of her anywhere in town. It was as though she had disappeared into thin air. The fear that she had run away, or worse, harmed herself, weighed heavily on those who cared for her. Jenna, who had once been Olivia's closest friend, could barely sleep at night, torn between the need to find her and the guilt of knowing she hadn't spoken up sooner. It wasn't until 2 weeks later that Olivia was found. She was discovered in a small, remote cabin in the woods on the outskirts of Lakeside, barely alive. She had been living in isolation, hiding from the world and running from the consequences of her actions. She had tried to end it all, overdosing on pills in a desperate bid to escape the crushing guilt and fear that had taken hold of her. But something inside her had fought back, and she survived. When Olivia was found, she was rushed to the hospital, where she was treated for the overdose. The police took her into custody shortly afterward, questioning her about the events that led to Coach Davis's death. Olivia's story was heartbreaking. She confessed to everything: the affair, the escalating tension, the violent confrontation that led to Davis's death. But her emotions were raw, and the weight of the guilt was clear in her voice. She didn't try to justify what had happened, but rather seemed to crumble under the truth of her own actions. It was clear to the authorities that she had not set out to kill Coach Davis. The tragic series of events had been a result of months of emotional manipulation, confusion, and desperation. Olivia was eventually charged with manslaughter, her trial gripping the town as the truth of her relationship with Coach Davis came to light. It was a case that shocked the community to its core, one that no one could have predicted. As Olivia faced the consequences of her actions, the town of Lakeside was forced to reckon with the dark secrets that had been hidden beneath the surface, secrets that would leave scars long after the trial was over. The affair, the lies, the manipulation, and the murder Lakeside would never be the same again.